Just want to tell you who I am. I work for Action Associates. I am an Acumatica application consultant. I've been with Action for a lot of years and different ERP products, mostly in the distribution, some manufacturing, some construction arena, but my background is really accounting, a little bit of tax along the way. So just wanted to share with you today some of the things that I've run into when I have assisted other customers in setting up their sales and use tax in Acumatica. I don't know if you guys are all aware, but you do have the sales tax or the taxes module is one of those standard modules that comes with your Acumatica software. Not everybody uses it or sets it up right away. If you do have to collect sales tax on the receivable side or pay a use tax on the payable side, it is something that comes with Acumatica that allows you to calculate those taxes on your invoices and your bills, and then prepare a tax report and even produce a tax bill when you need to pay that tax authority. So today we're going to walk through how to set that up and then the processing of it from start to finish, both on the receivables and on the payable side. Just wanted to let you know, whatever you don't get out of today's information, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Acumatica community, but obviously you can log in and get some more helpful information, some product ideas, something that maybe other people have seen. You know, it's a good way of sharing information and getting more information other than just through these types of webinars. And then obviously there's the Open University at openuni.acumatica.com. Again, you have to have a sign-in. It's normally your Acumatica customer portal sign-in. And it allows you to go through courses, and there's learning paths related to your job, as well as job aids and some videos out there that allows you to get familiar with the software and maybe onboard new employees as well. All right, so today we're going to talk about the sales and use tax setup, and I'm going to go through, there's about 14 different steps. I like to go in this order. It makes most sense to me. Hopefully it makes sense to you guys, but it's from starting with setting up a tax agency in your vendor profiles, maybe looking at some of the tax preferences. Then we need to prepare what we call like a tax report. And all a tax report is the ability to group your tax information by how you have to report, like the total tax, either by state or by county or by city, depending on the types of taxes that you have to collect. You can create lines on a report to group and to gather all of the information from your invoices and bills so that you can prepare any tax reporting documents from either Acumatica or through another tax reporting program, or even just to go online to those state websites and report your taxes that way. We also can talk about how we group those taxes, you know, on the individual lines, and then apply those to the individual taxes, setting up tax categories at the item or non-stock item level, setting up tax periods, and then the individual taxes, and then the tax zones. So let me open up a demo here and kind of show you the first step that you need to do. You don't need to enable the tax module, but you do collecting taxes, and then which authority are you going to be paying that tax to? So if you go into your vendors, and again, it might be a little slow, this demo said, oh, that's not too bad. And we're just going to bring up a vendor profile record. There is a checkbox in there where you will determine, actually, I probably should go to a second here. I already set up a Pennsylvania sales tax agency. So this is my vendor that, and again, as long as I mark it as a vendor tax agency, then what it does is it opens up this new tab for tax agency, where you can define your liability GL account, your expense account, your tax claimable account. We're not going to talk about that today, value-added taxes. I don't know if that really applies to anybody. We're really only going to talk about sales and use tax today. And then based on how often you have to pay or report that tax to, in this example, the Pennsylvania Sales Tax Authority, I have determined that I have to record or pay monthly. And then I want to automatically generate a tax bill when I prepare that tax report so that it accumulates all of the tax that I've collected and then creates an open payables out there that I need to then pay the tax authority for that sales tax I collected. All right. Now, the next thing that we have to do is we have to then verify. I'm just going to show you back on the screen here. Then we're going to want to go to tax preferences. So if I go down to more items here, and then you can see that there's a taxes module and show all, and underneath preferences, you do have a tax preferences. Not a lot to set up here. Again, it's when you're creating your AP bill, if you have it to auto create that bill, do you want to continue to use the same numbering sequence as your normal AP bills, or do you want to create your own numbering sequence? And then if there's any rounding differences, gain or loss, where do you want that to be recorded to? So that's really it as far as the preferences. The next thing that we're going to do here is we're going to look at setting up a tax report. And so what this does is it allows me to then figure out what do I need to report to that tax agency. So underneath the preferences, there is this reporting settings option. And you're going to be selecting the tax agency that you're going to set this up for. So in my example, I've already created this. It's for my tax agency, PA Sales, which is my vendor. And it's only going to show you the ones that are marked in the vendor profile as a tax agency. Obviously, it's not going to pull in all your vendors. And then you can have multiple versions of this report out there where you set a valid from date. So if I know that, my reporting requirements, or I decide later on that I want to report information starting on, say, August 1st, I can create a new version for the same tax agency and just set up different lines that I want to report. I want to be able to include on this report. Now, the lines that I'm putting on there is I want to accumulate all of the tax for the state of Pennsylvania, because that's going to be at one rate. So I need to know what I've collected as far as tax. And then when you say update amount, your options are tax amount or taxable amount. So this happens to be a tax amount type of line. Then I also want to see by tax zone, because I have a special tax in the city of Philadelphia. So not everybody is in the city of Philadelphia that I need to collect tax from. Maybe I just need state tax. But if it happens to be Philadelphia, I need to add an additional 2% tax. So that one is also a tax amount. And then when I check this detail by tax zone, that then puts in and says, okay, it's going to then give me a line for every tax zone that I've set up for the Pennsylvania Sales Tax Agency. Then I want a total of the two taxes of all of my taxes by tax zone, as well as my state tax. So that's my net tax. Then I want to see my taxable sales. Again, this is my taxable amount that my sales tax is being calculated off of. And I want to see it by state. And I also want to see it by tax zone. So I do check that box. I also want to see exempt sales. And I'll show you what that means in a minute. Again, each line on an invoice or a bill is going to be determined as being taxable or tax exempt. And those are what we set up by tax category. So I want to see my exempt sales. And then I want to see the total of my state and my exempt to get to my gross sales. And then I've also set up to be able to calculate use tax on the AP side. And I want to see all my purchases subject to use tax. Now, use tax is not something that gets added to a bill, but it's something that I need to know in the background that I'm subject to use tax based on that particular bill or the amount that the vendor billed me. And so I need to be able to see those purchases subject to use tax because I'm going to have to remit that. And then I want to see the total use tax calculated. And then I might have some tax that I want to then break out on the AP side as well. I want to see all the sales tax that was added to my AP bills that my vendor collected on my behalf. So if you look at these types of update rule, these are my update rule of output in. And what that means is that I'm collecting and paying to a tax agency. But if you notice on the sales tax on your AP purchases, it's an input type, meaning that someone else is collecting it and paying it. I do not have to remit that amount. That's part of the AP bill. But I still wanted a line. And I could hide that line so it doesn't appear on the tax report. So it's just a matter of whether you want to calculate it on your AP side and put it to a special GL account. Some people just roll it right into or set up a non-stop charge code to collect that sales tax. That's up to you how you want to do it. But this is another way of having the AP bill calculate the sales tax and include it in the bill that you have to pay the vendor. All right. And then the next step I have to do is if I go to reporting groups, I have to then tell the system, how am I grouping everything? This is probably to me, the most complicated side. I need to have a grouping that shows by state and then by locality or tax zone, if you want to call it. I want to see my exempt side, and then I want to see the use tax that I have to remit. And then I want to see the input side, which is the part that I paid already in AP sales tax. And then I'm going to go, again, I could go directly and I could set up the group details, but as long as I've set up these groups and then save it, I can then go directly to group details, or I could go to taxes and go to reporting groups and it takes you to the same spot. So again, I have to select my tax agency. I want to see the group. Now, again, I'm looking at the first grouping, my first output grouping, which is my taxable state for this version. And so these are my lines on the report. So if you notice, I have said sales tax state is part of my taxable state, and then the total tax, and then taxable sales state, and then gross sales. And then based on these groupings that I've set up, it'll put the calculations on your tax report. So I'll open that up so that you can see that. So now I have a grouping for my taxable local, which is my tax zone, and I want to see the sales tax by tax zone. It also makes up part of total tax, and then it also brings in the taxable sales by tax zone. And then same thing when I go to exempt, I only want to see my exempt sales, but I know that this sales is also going to be included in gross sales. And then the use tax is purchases subject to use tax, line 8 and line 9, which is my use tax. And then my input, which is my sales tax on purchases. So just to kind of go back, once I create my reporting groups and I've signed lines to those reporting groups, and the lines are coming from your tax report. Let me open this back up. So as you can see, based on those reporting groups, it automatically puts the calculation rule. It says, all right, line 1 and line 2 makes up line 3, which is my total tax. And then line 4, which is my taxable state, and my exempt sales makes up my gross sales. So those are the only 2 real calculations that the system needs to know. And this is all so that I can create a report at the end of the month, and I can easily prepare any documents that I need to do or create any AP bills. All right, so that's really it as far as setting up the actual report. And now you'll do this by every tax agency. So you'll repeat the process. You'll set up the vendor as the tax agency. So if you have to collect sales tax in the state of New York, you'll have the state of New York or New York sales tax agency as a vendor. You'll check that box. You'll put in the GL account, and then you will go to the report settings and set up for the New York sales tax agency and the report lines and the report groups. And then you'll also complete all the report groups and assign them to the lines. So you will repeat steps 1, 3, and 4 for any new tax agency you need to set up. All right, the next step is to make sure that my tax categories are set up correct. And if you look underneath the taxes, there is the tax categories. And again, this is probably already set up for you, because when you create items, whether they be non-stock or stock items in the system, you have to have at least one tax category. So most people set it up as exempt and taxable as the 2 different tax categories. But you could set up multiple tax categories. So if you have different services out there with different rules, based on how you're going to tax them, you could assign items to a different tax category than just taxable or exempt. But you probably want to change your report so that you know where to collect those, or change the taxes that you're collecting so it knows where to group it in based on tax category. All right. After you've set up your tax categories, you do need to make sure that on the inventory side, in your stock items and in your non-stocks, that you have assigned those tax categories appropriately. As kind of a FYI, a rule, I like to make, unless I know it's never taxable, like labor or service or whatever, I might make certain things, like if I sell this access door, whether it be a non-stock or a stock item, maybe I know that sometimes it's taxable and sometimes it's not taxable. As a default, I should always make it taxable, because really the tax is not determined. It's based on the customer that you're selling it to and their tax zone or their rules, whether they're exempt or they owe sales tax. So as a rule, I like to make everything with a tax category at the stock and the non-stock level, and I like to make sure that it's set up to be taxable, so that if I ever I don't have to go through and do like a mass up to change everything, because the system won't the way you set it up is it won't calculate the sales tax on that line if it knows that it's exempt. So again, you just need to go into your non-stock or your stock items, make sure you have the correct tax category in there. Let's look at your tax periods. Again, that's on the tax thing. You shouldn't have to do anything with tax periods. It's going to use, again, it's based on the tax agency and whether you've set it up as monthly or quarterly. So for example, if I pull up my PA sales tax agency, it knows automatically that my periods are monthly because I have set that up in the vendor profile record under tax agency. And it just shows you the status of the periods. And by preparing a tax report and releasing it, it then closes out that period and then opens up the next period. And again, by just doing transactions, the first transaction that you do for a period automatically, as long as it hasn't been closed out, will automatically open up that period. So that's another thing, is if you see everything open, if the first time you do a tax transaction, whether through receivables or payables, it will automatically post or put to that period. It will know which period to assign it to. All right, so not a lot really to do on the tax period side. The next thing is to set up your individual taxes. Now, some people like to go to tax zones first and then sort of conceptualize, well, how am I going to be grouping my taxes? I like to set up the taxes first. And I'll show you in this example for Pennsylvania, is I have set up a PA exempt tax because I need to know what are my exempt sales. Even though it's a 0%, I need to assign it to a grouping on my report, which happens to be my exempt. So I hit the plus sign, I create a new tax ID, I tell it that it's part of sales tax. And again, we're only going to be discussing sales and use tax today, not the other types. Typically, it's going to default to exclusive document level. I like to use line level if you wanted to assign it to, again, for exempt sales, doesn't really matter because it's a 0 tax. But for other ones, your options are going to be to exclusive line level or exclusive document level. Inclusive means that you are going to be including it in the next tax, so it's either like your first level tax or your compound, which is your second level tax. So that means you want to include the tax amount in the total tax calculation. So I use exclusive line level so that it knows to include it into the line amount, like the expense account that goes to that line there. So I'll show you that when we walk through a scenario here. You have to tie it to that tax agency so it knows which tax report we're using. I do mark the exclude from tax on tax calculation. You could have it where you say not valid after a certain date. So it could be that you have certain taxes that are only good through a certain date. But the other option is you can have multiple tax rates out here and put individual start dates. And I'll show you that when we go to the next tax that we're setting up. And then I assign it to the exempt category. So any line item that is considered to be exempt or non-taxable will accumulate under the exempt grouping on my report. So that's how we tie everything together. And then I'll show you zones in a second. And then on the GL accounts, it brings in from the GL accounts from that tax agency. If you want to override the tax expense account, you can check that box and then it makes it available and you can use a different tax expense account. I typically use the expense account that's associated with the line that I'm calculating the sales tax on. So you just have to decide which scenario makes sense for you, whether you want it to be grouped under a sales tax expense account or if you want it to be like part of cost of goods sold or the actual expense account for that line. All right, I'm also going to set up another tax ID called PA sales tax. Now this is my 6%. And I set it up, I make sure that I have the right tax agency. I make sure that it's line level or document level exclusive. And then I will have two different ones out here. And again, the start date isn't really important as long as it, you know, if you wanted to create, like, let's say on, you know, 8/1/2022, you know, it's going up to 6 1/4. You could just hit the plus sign and you could put the start date for the new tax rate and put the new tax amount in there. I have set up a line for my receivable side, which is my output, meaning that I am collecting the tax and paying it to a tax authority. And I put it on the grouping taxable state. Remember, we set up those groupings just prior in the preferences. And I said, I'm going to collect 6% sales tax whenever this PA sales tax comes into play. And then on the payable side, this is my input. I'm going to calculate 6% sales tax on my payables, and that's what the input side says. Again, if this vendor tax comes into play. And then I want to make sure that I assign it to the tax category of taxable. So only the lines that are taxable are going to be calculating this particular tax. And then again, you have the GL accounts and you can override it here as well. And then the next tax that I have set up, I set up a use tax specifically as this is the use tax on the payable side where the vendor did not collect it, but I know that I'm going to have to remit that tax. So it's not added to the bill, but it is going to be a liability for me. So again, it's a 6% sales tax for Pennsylvania. It is a use tax type. And I have to make sure that I put it onto the grouping of use tax, the grouping that I've set up. And then the next one is, because I'm doing it by tax zone, I know that I have multiple taxes in the state of Pennsylvania. I do have a special tax just for Philadelphia sales, and that's a 2% rate. And again, that's going to be grouped onto my taxable local grouping. And something to note that on this particular one, again, these are all taxable, meaning only tax lines are going to be calculating the sales tax. And just note that, you know, in the state of Pennsylvania, you're going to be, when you go to set up your tax zone, it's going to be using the Pennsylvania state sales tax and possibly the Philadelphia sales tax, depending on what tax zone that person is in. So that leads us to the next setup, zones. So we'll go back to our taxes module and I will select tax zones. Now this is what actually gets assigned to either a customer tax zone, a customer location, a vendor, if you're calculating use tax, or vendor location. Also can be assigned to projects, and I'll show you how to set that one up as well. And then you can actually override that tax zone on the individual documents, the invoices or the payables and the bills. So I will show you how to do that as well. So we're going to set up a Pennsylvania sales tax. So this is for everybody that I need to collect sales tax just for the state of Pennsylvania. They're not in the city of Philadelphia. So I need to know what my exempt sales are for those documents, and I need to know my sales tax for the state. So this is where I add my individual taxes. Now, the other thing to note when you're setting up a zone is you could just set up and say, based on the zip code, it will know how much sales tax. So if I say zip code is included in this tax, I wouldn't then have to set up all of the individual taxes. I could just say, hey, you know what, based on the zip code, it doesn't matter which tax zone they have. So that's another way around it if you want to upload. And you do have the ability to upload, you know, this actual zip codes in the state of Pennsylvania if you needed to. All right, so these two tax types or tax IDs make up this tax zone, the Pennsylvania sales tax zone. And then another tax zone that I set up is my use tax. Again, this would just be on the payable side, and it's just going to include the PA use tax ID, which is my 6% that's going to be remitted. It's going to be a liability, but it's not going to be part of the AP bill. And then this is my Philadelphia tax zone, and it's made up of my exempt sales, my state sales, as well as my 2% Philadelphia tax. So again, this is how you then group all of your taxes to figure out what's the total tax they have to pay for this tax zone. So once you've set up all your tax zones, you do need to go back into your reporting settings. And it's just sort of a check, and you do have to reload your tax zones. And it will tell you if there's been any changes since the last time. So if you do any updates to your tax zones, like add or modify your tax zones, you probably should go in here and reload those. It's always a step that I forget, and I get burned on an awful lot. All right. So this is what we've done now. We've set up our tax profiles, which are the types of taxes. We've set up the tax zones where we've grouped those taxes to accumulate all the tax that I need to collect for that tax zone. I've reloaded my tax zones and my report settings. Now, the next step is I may or may not want to assign those tax zones to my vendors, my customers, or to my projects. So I'm going to show you how to do that now. So if we go back into our vendors, and let's just look at AA vendor, for example. Second to load here. I can go to my purchase settings here, and underneath purchase settings, there is the tax zone, and I can select PA use. So I know that I need to pay use tax whenever a bill is created for this vendor, or I can select PA sales tax because I want to be able to calculate the sales tax because I have to remit sales tax when I get an invoice from them. So this is where you can sort of hard code in what the tax zone is. So every bill now that I create for this AA vendor is going to automatically include this PA use tax on the document itself. It'll calculate in the background that 6% use tax, but won't actually add it to the bill. And again, it's based on any lines that are considered to be taxable as well. The other option is you might want to do it by location. So if you have multiple locations, you can go into each location and you can assign a tax zone there as well, because that might come into play either on the customer or the vendor side. So again, there's a purchase setting here, and then there is a tax zone as well here. Okay, so if I save it here, then any document I create for this, or any bill I create for this vendor, is going to try to calculate use tax for all the taxable items. Same thing on the customer side is I can go to customers or customers locations if I'm using them, and I can assign a tax zone that I've already created. That's going to be on the shipping tab. And again, there's a tax zone here for that customer. And then this one, I'm going to assign the PA. Actually, I'm going to do the Philadelphia tax. And again, if I'm not using zip codes, then it's important to assign the tax zone here, sort of hard coding it onto the customer or the location. All right. And then the final step, if anybody is using projects or constructability with the version 22R1, which is the newest Acumatica version, if you go into project preferences, you can actually say that you want it to calculate it at the project level. Let's see. Here we go. calculate project specific taxes. So if this is checked, then when I go into projects, let's just pull up an example of a project right now and go into my Italian restaurant here. And to load. Underneath addresses, there is now a cost tax zone and a revenue tax zone. So if I'm billing for a job and I put the PA tax in there, for all of my tax items on that invoice, it's going to calculate a 6% sales tax automatically for me based on the tax zone that I've assigned here. So this will sort of override, you know, the customer tax zone. This will now use the project tax zone. And then same thing on the cost side. It'll automatically calculate the 6% sales tax there. All right, now let's walk through, you know, we've showed you how to set up the vendors for the tax zones, the customers, and then the projects. Now we're going to walk through how to process your taxes. And I'm going to walk through doing an AR invoice, also as well as an AP bill, and then we'll walk through how to prepare that. All right, so let's go and do our first invoice. And again, I'm going to do outside of project billing. I'm just going to do a straight invoice. I apologize how slow this server is here. Really slow today. I'm going to grab my customer. Again, if it was for a project, you know, you wouldn't have to have a tax zone in there. It would look at the project tax zone. I'm going to add an item in here. Just going to put in, I'm going to bill them for an access store, which happens to be a non-stock item. Just going to bill them for one. And if you notice, it automatically calculated my 6% sales tax. And if I go to my taxes tab, it shows me that I did it because this customer was assigned to the Philadelphia tax zone. It knows to automatically do a 6% sales tax on that line item that's taxable, as well as a 2%. So a total of $1,200 was calculated. Now, if you ever need to override and say, oh yeah, I really don't want to calculate sales tax for this line item, you could change it, you know, on a line by line basis and change it to exempt. So for example, if this one is now exempt and I go to taxes, it's now going to accumulate that line as the 0 rate, but it's going to accumulate under the exempt sales so that I can keep track of my exempt sales. So that's just a really nice, just to kind of test, you know, you don't even have to post it, just to test that it's calculating correctly. I do this a lot. I'm just going to add one more line here, and I'm going to put in maybe some labor here. And I'm just going to put in $100 or $1,000 labor here. And this one should be set up as, well, it doesn't have tax category, but I'll make sure that it does have exempt. So that if I go back to my taxes tab, you'll see that it not only calculated my 6% Philadelphia or Pennsylvania tax, my 2% Philadelphia, but it also put the $1,000 under my exempt category. So what it's doing is it's accumulating this $15,000 of taxable sales, the $1,200 of total tax, but broken out by tax zone. And then the exempt sales of $1,000. So when I release that, I'll then be able to see it. Now I'm going to do this as of a June tax report. because I know that I've already done May and I just want to open up June now. And I'm just going to release this. And I apologize for the slowness here. I don't know if it's my Wi-Fi or if it happens to be the server, but I'm just going to have a quick look at the GL batch behind it, just so you can see what happens to the sales tax that I've collected, because now it's a liability that I have to turn around and pay. So if you look at this, the total 17,200 went to receivables. I've got my sales revenue, my the labor charge that I put in there, and then I have this sales tax liability of 900 to the state of Pennsylvania, as well as 300 to the city of Philadelphia. So based on how I've set up my GL accounts, it knows to use the correct liability accounts, and that's done at the tax ID or at the customer, I'm sorry, the vendor level. All right. Something I'm going to look at is I'm going to look at my tax report now. So if I go to my taxes module and I go to prepare tax report, I should see now my next report for Pennsylvania should now be showing me June. And that basically just accumulated everything from that one invoice. I had $900 of state sales tax that I collected, $300 of Philadelphia, for a total tax of $1,200. My taxable sales for the state were $15,000. My taxable sales for Philadelphia were $15,000. My exempt sales were $1,000. My gross were $16,000. So that's what happened when I did a bill. Now let's look on the payable side, and we'll just look at doing a use tax, for example, so you can see how that gets calculated. So I'm going to create a new bill. I'm also going to do it for the month of June, just so I can show the whole report for June. So let me just change my transaction date to some date in June. So you have to have a bill in here. And I'm going to use my AA vendor. And if you notice that it's going to pull in the tax zone that I put already at the vendor profile record. So it knows to calculate use tax for this particular vendor. I do have the ability to clear that out if I don't want to calculate.
Are you still there, Laura?
I'm still here. Why did I cut out here?
Yeah, you cut out just for about 10 seconds there.
Sorry about that. I think I'm having Wi-Fi issues too. So I don't know if you guys saw, but the vendor tax zone came through from the vendor profile record, but I can clear that out, or I could change it to PA sales tax if I wanted to. So now I'm going to add an item onto my AP bill here. I'm not going to assign it to a project, so I'm going to put project X in here. It is taxable. So if you notice, because I've set it up to calculate use tax, it gives me a soft warning. It doesn't add the use tax onto the bill, because this is what the vendor isn't billing me for the sales tax. I then need to remit that use tax. But what it's doing is, if I go to my taxes tab, it is accumulating my 6% sales tax liability on this particular bill. This one has a discount, so it knew to calculate it off the discount. So just FYI, that's how you would do a use tax based on that vendor tax zone. If I had said, you know what, the vendor is billing me for sales tax, I could change it to PA tax. And now you can see that the tax is actually included. So it goes from use tax to sales tax. And now it's being included on there. All right. I am going to remove this one from hold. I'm going to release it. And now if I go back to my tax report, you'll see that now I have AP sales tax that it's already been included on my purchases. If I had left it as a use tax, I would have seen it on this line with the purchases subject to use tax. So now let's say I'm at the end of the month and I need to remit a tax. I need to remit those taxes I've collected to my sales tax, Pennsylvania Sales Tax Authority. So if everything is done, I can prepare my tax report. Again, it just shows me what's being accumulated on here. And then I can either adjust it, I can create adjustments on here, or I can release it. And when I release it, it then creates, if I go back to my payables, I should see a bill out there because I've asked it to create the bill for me. So now I have a PA sales tax open bill out there, which should show me my $1,200 of sales tax that I've collected for the month of June. There we go. So there's my 1,200, which then I can when I'm ready to pay it, I can remit that payment at that time. So really it as far as the process doing it, we walk through creating an invoice and collecting sales tax. We walk through creating an AP bill and or accumulating a use tax liability. We walk through preparing that tax period by tax agency and releasing it, and then creating it automatically created that AP bill, my tax liability to my tax agency. All right. And then we talked about, if you guys need any additional support, if you need somebody to help you set this up, I would suggest that you send an email request to support@action.com. If you want to learn additional information about any other areas of Acumatica software, obviously Open University is a great tool. Something we didn't talk about, because as you can see, if you have a lot of nexus situation where you're having to collect sales tax in a lot of different states, it can get quite timely. It could be a lot of time having to maintain all of the sales tax rates, and even the setup could be quite time consuming. So not that I'm suggesting, but there are third-party tax products that do integrate with Acumatica. A few examples are Avalara and Vertex, and they will do all of the tax calculations for you based on the customer vendor and how you've set it up. And I don't know if they do the project side of it. We'd have to figure that out, but they will support all of that updating of the tax rates for you, and it would just work in the background when you do your invoicing and your AP bills to do all those calculations for you. All right. So I left you guys about 15 minutes for questions, and I haven't checked to see if anybody's put anything out there. But does anybody want to, hey, Lauren, I think we can unmute people if they want to just ask questions, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, if anybody has questions, you can certainly type them into the chat or the Q&A. If you would like for me to unmute you, I know it can get a little busy if I unmute everybody at once, but you certainly can let me know and I'll unmute you. But Laura, if you want me to unmute everyone, I certainly can do that too.
Hey, we don't have like a huge group, but I can certainly open it up to any questions if anybody just wants to ask the question.
Okay.
I don't see any questions at this time. If you guys think of anything, by all means, send your questions or requests to support@action.com. We're more than happy to assist you guys. All right.
Yeah, I don't see anything.
All right. Well, hopefully I didn't cut out too much in there, that you guys didn't miss anything. I apologize for my slow Wi-Fi here, but
yeah, it wasn't too bad. It was just that one little.
Okay, good.
Yeah, it was good.
Good. I appreciate it. And Lauren's going to have this recording for you guys. So if we went too fast and you guys didn't get something, feel free to review that.
Yeah, definitely. And like Laura just said, I will follow up with the recording. You know, if you have any further questions, you can certainly send those to me and I'll forward them on to Laura, or we can just address those as needed. So, but thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Laura. You did an awesome job.
Thank you.
And hope you guys have a lovely rest of your Thursday. Thanks, Laura.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.